Beside him sat Isabella, the woman everyone feared even more, a beauty so cruel she made grown men tremble. But that night, in the most expensive restaurant in the city, the silence wasn't broken by a gunshot. It was broken by a waitress, a girl with $0 in her bank account and a stained apron. She didn't use a gun. She didn't use a knife. She took down the mafia's most dangerous woman with a salad fork, and what she found on that silver prong didn't just end a marriage. It started a war. The rain in Chicago didn't wash the city clean. It just made the grime slicker. Adele barely noticed the downpour as she sprinted towards the rear entrance of the gilded cage. It was 6:55 p.m. If she was 1 minute late, Henderson would fire her. And if Henderson fired her, she wouldn't make rent, which meant she'd be back on the streets of the South Side, a place she had promised her dying mother she would never return to. "You're cutting it close, Rinaldi," the maitre d', Henderson, hissed as she burst through the kitchen doors. He was a small man with a moustache that looked like it was drawn on with a Sharpie, and he smelled perpetually of nervous sweat and cheap cologne. "Sorry, Mr. Henderson. The L train was down at Weston," Adele gasped, tying her apron with practiced speed. She smoothed her black skirt, checked her white button down for lint, and pulled her dark hair back into a severe bun. "I don't care about the train. I care about Table 1, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The kitchen went silent. The chefs stopped chopping. The dishwashers stopped scrubbing. Even the steam rising from the pots seemed to pause. Table 1. "They're coming," Adele asked, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. "He is coming," Henderson said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "James Moretti. And he's bringing her." A collective shudder went through the staff. James Moretti was the CEO of Moretti Holdings, a legitimate real estate empire that barely concealed the massive criminal underworld beneath it. He was dangerous, yes, but he was known to be a gentleman criminal. He tipped well, spoke quietly, and never made a scene. The problem was his fiancée, Isabella Thorne. Isabella was a nightmare wrapped in designer silk. She was the daughter of a rival family from New York, a peace treaty in the form of a woman. She was beautiful, rich, and possessed a cruelty that bordered on psychotic. Last month, she had a waiter fired and blacklisted from every restaurant in the city because he poured the sparkling water too aggressively. "Sarah called out sick," Henderson said, looking at Adele with desperate eyes. "She's terrified of Isabella. You're the only one left with the etiquette training to handle them." Adele nodded slowly. Before her father's antique business had collapsed and he had gambled away their life savings, Adele had grown up in this world. She knew which fork was for oysters and which was for salad. She knew that a 1982 Chateau Margaux needed to breathe for exactly 45 minutes. She knew the language of the rich. She just didn't have the money anymore. "I'll take the table," Adele said quietly. "Good. God help you," Henderson muttered. "And Adele, don't make eye contact with him. And whatever you do, do not correct her. If she says the sky is green, you ask her what shade." Adele stepped out onto the floor of the gilded cage. The restaurant was a cavern of gold leaf, velvet, and shadows. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears from the ceiling. At exactly 7 p.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. 4 bodyguards in Brioni suits entered first, scanning the room with earpieces buzzing. Then James Moretti walked in. He was taller than he looked in the papers, with broad shoulders and a tailored black suit that cost more than Adele would earn in 10 years. His face was hard, angular, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, but his eyes were a startling, intelligent blue. On his arm was Isabella. She wore a dress the color of fresh blood, slashed low in the front and back. Diamonds glittered at her throat, heavy, ostentatious stones that screamed power. She looked like a queen. But Adele, watching from the shadows of the service station, noticed something else. She noticed the way Isabella's hand gripped James's forearm. It wasn't affection. It was possession. And her eyes weren't looking at him. They were scanning the room, looking for prey. They sat at table 1, the secluded booth in the back. Adele took a deep breath. She grabbed her notepad. "Showtime," she whispered to herself. The first 20 minutes were a masterclass in humiliation. Isabella sent the water back because it was too cold. She sent the bread basket back because the crust was too rustic. She snapped her fingers at Adele as if she were a stray dog. James sat in silence, scrolling through something on a secure tablet. He seemed bored, or perhaps just resigned. He barely looked at Isabella, and he hadn't looked at Adele once. "Excuse me," Isabella said, her voice like shattered glass. She held up her wine glass. "I ordered the 96 Barolo. This tastes like vinegar. Did you pour me the house red, you little scam artist?" Adele froze. She had opened the bottle herself at the table. It was a $4,000 bottle. "I assure you, Signorina Thorne, that is the Barolo," Adele said, keeping her voice even. "I can bring the cork for your inspection." Isabella laughed, a harsh, tinny sound. "The cork? You think I want to see a piece of trash? Take it away. Bring me another bottle. And if this one is spoiled, I'll have your job." "Isabella," James said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and smooth. He didn't look up from his tablet. "The wine is fine. Stop." Isabella's eyes narrowed. She turned her venom from Adele to James. "Oh, you're defending the help now, James. Is she your type? She looks like a drowned rat." Adele bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted copper. She took the glass. "I will decant a fresh bottle immediately, ma'am." As Adele turned to leave, Isabella, accidentally, knocked her clutch purse off the table. It hit the floor, spilling lipstick and a compact mirror. "Oops," Isabella smirked. "Pick it up." Adele paused. She was a waitress, not a personal servant. But she needed this job. She needed the tips. She crouched down, gathering the items. As she reached for a silver tube of lipstick, Isabella's high heel came down, stomping on Adele's hand. Adele gasped, yanking her hand back. Pain shot through her fingers. "Clumsy," Isabella sneered. James finally looked up. He set the tablet down. His blue eyes locked onto Isabella, then shifted to Adele, who was cradling her throbbing hand. For a second, Adele saw something flicker in his gaze. Not pity. Anger. "Are you all right?" James asked Adele. It was the first time he had spoken to her. "I'm fine, sir," Adele said, standing up quickly, hiding her trembling hand behind her apron. "I'll get the wine." She retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her fingers were red and swelling. "She's a monster," Henderson whispered, watching from the pass. "Just get through the main course, Adele. Just the main course." Adele took a deep breath. She had studied chemistry in college before her father's scandal ruined them. She knew how to analyze things. She knew how to look at details. And as she replayed the interaction in her head, something felt off. Isabella was acting terrified. Yes, she was bullying Adele. But underneath the cruelty, Isabella's hands were shaking. She was sweating through her heavy makeup. She kept checking her watch. She wasn't just being a diva. She was stalling. She was trying to distract James. Why? Adele picked up the tray for the main course. James had ordered the filet mignon, rare. Isabella had ordered the sea bass. Adele walked back out. She approached the table with the grace of a tightrope walker. "Your entrees," Adele said, placing the plates down. "Finally," Isabella huffed. She picked up her fork, and that's when Adele saw it. It was a small detail, a tiny, almost invisible detail. But to a girl who had spent her childhood in antique shops analyzing silver hallmarks, it was as loud as a siren. Isabella wasn't eating. She was holding her fork in her left hand, but she wasn't bringing food to her mouth. She was using the tines of the fork to scratch something onto the side of her wine glass. A rhythmic scratching. Scrape, scrape, tap, scrape. Adele paused, holding the water pitcher. Isabella looked at James. "Eat, darling. You must be starving." James picked up his steak knife. "I'm not hungry." "Please," Isabella pushed. her voice taking on a frantic edge. The chef prepared it, specially. Just one bite. James looked at her, suspicious. Why are you so eager for me to eat, Bella? I just want you to be happy, she smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. James sighed and cut a piece of the steak. He raised the fork to his mouth. Adele's eyes dropped to James's fork, then to Isabella's fork. Wait, the restaurant used Christoffel Sterling silver, high polish, flawless. But the fork in James's hand, the tines were slightly dull. A matte grey film near the handle. Adele's mind raced back to her chemistry labs. Silver sulfide creates tarnish. But silver reacts instantly to certain sulfides found in... And then she saw Isabella's ring. A massive emerald. But the setting was open, and directly under the stone, resting against the metal of the fork she had been holding before she swapped them, Isabella had swapped forks. When the appetizers were cleared, Isabella had switched her unused fork with James's. Stop! The word ripped out of Adele's throat before she could stop it. The silence that followed was absolute. James froze, the fork an inch from his lips. He didn't drop it. He didn't flinch. He just slowly turned his head to look at Adele. His expression was unreadable, lethal. Isabella slammed her hand on the table. How dare you! You insolent little... Don't eat that, Adele said, her voice shaking, but her posture rigid. She stepped forward, violating the personal space of the most dangerous man in Chicago. Excuse me? James asked softly. Get security, Isabella shrieked, standing up. She's crazy. She's trying to attack us. Silas. The lead bodyguard, Silas, a mountain of a man, moved towards the table, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Stay back, Silas, James commanded. He didn't look away from Adele. He lowered the fork slowly to the plate. Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you dragged out of here and buried in a cornfield, miss. Rinaldi, Adele said. Adele Rinaldi. Miss Rinaldi. Explain. The fork, Adele said, pointing a trembling finger. Look at the tines. Near the neck. Isabella lunged. She's insane. It's dirty. The service here is filth. She reached out to grab James's fork, trying to knock it off the table. Adele moved faster. Years of dodging creditors and navigating crowded kitchens had given her reflexes. She slapped Isabella's hand away, a move that made the entire restaurant gasp, and grabbed the fork herself. You touched me! Isabella screamed. James, kill her! She touched me! Adele held the fork up to the chandelier light. Mr. Moretti, do you see that grey film? The matte finish. It's tarnish, Isabella yelled. It's cheap silver. It is Christoffel Sterling, Adele shot back, her voice gaining strength. It doesn't tarnish like that unless it's exposed to a high concentration of sulfur or arsenic. James's eyes narrowed. Arsenic? She's lying! Isabella was hyperventilating now. She's a waitress. What does she know about chemistry? I was a third-year pre-med student at Northwestern before I had to drop out, Adele lied. Well, partially. She was a chemistry major, not pre-med, but the authority helped. And I know that specific oxidation pattern. Adele grabbed her water glass, the one with the lemon wedge she had poured for herself at the service station. If this is just tarnish, Adele said, looking James in the eye, then lemon juice, citric acid, will clean it slightly. But if it's a sulfide-based toxin, the acid will accelerate the reaction and turn the silver black instantly. Isabella's face went pale. Don't you dare! James looked at his fiancée, seeing the fear in her eyes. Then he looked at Adele. Do it, James ordered. Adele dipped the tines of the fork into the lemon water. She swirled it for 3 seconds. The room was so quiet you could hear the traffic on Michigan Avenue outside. She pulled the fork out. It wasn't silver anymore. The tines were jet black, coated in a thick, dark sludge where the metal had reacted violently. The chemical stench hit them a second later, bitter almonds and rot. Adele placed the black fork on the white tablecloth. It looked like a charred bone. He would have been dead before the check came, Adele whispered. James stared at the black fork. The realization washed over him. He slowly turned to Isabella. Isabella was trembling, backing away, clutching her emerald ring. "James?" "No." "She rigged it. It's a magic trick. She's a witch." "The ring," Adele said, her adrenaline peaking. "The poison is in a dissolvable wax under her ring setting. She transferred it to the fork handle, and gravity pulled it down to the tines." James stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't flip the table. He simply adjusted his cufflinks. "Silas," James said. His voice was devoid of humanity. "Boss? Lock the doors. No one leaves." Isabella bolted. She kicked off her heels and sprinted toward the kitchen doors, but she wasn't fast enough. Silas intercepted her, grabbing her by the arm. She screamed, a feral, ugly sound that shattered the elegance of the gilded cage. "Get off me! My father will kill you! I am a DeLuca!" she shrieked. James walked over to her. He loomed over her like a dark god. He reached out and ripped the emerald ring off her finger. He held it up to the light, inspecting the underside. He saw the residue. He looked at Isabella with disgust. "Your father isn't the problem, Bella. I am." He nodded to Silas. "Take her to the car. The trunk." "No, James, please." "Down." Isabella was dragged out, her heels scraping across the expensive parquet floor, leaving scuff marks that would cost thousands to fix. The restaurant was dead silent. Every patron was staring. James turned back to the table. He looked at the poisoned steak. He looked at the black fork. Finally, he looked at Adele. She was standing there, shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, clutching her tray against her chest like a shield. James walked up to her. He was terrifyingly close. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood and cold rain. "Adele Rinaldi," he said, testing the name. "Yes, sir. You just saved my life. I just didn't want you to die on my shift, sir. The paperwork is terrible." A corner of James's mouth twitched. A smirk. "Give me your hand," he commanded. Adele hesitated, then held out her hand, the one Isabella had stomped on. It was bruising, purple and blue across the knuckles. James took her hand in his. His grip was surprisingly gentle, his thumb grazing the bruise. His skin was warm. "She hurt you," he said darkly. "It's fine," Adele stammered. "It is not fine." He released her hand and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a black card made of heavy metal. "I don't carry cash, but this restaurant, who owns it?" "Mr. Henderson keeps the books, but the ownership is a holding company," Adele whispered, confused. Henderson appeared, sweating profusely. "Mr. Moretti, I am so sorry. I had no idea. "Quiet," James said without looking at him. He kept his eyes on Adele. "You're fired." Adele's heart stopped. "What?" "You're fired," James repeated. "You're too smart to be serving steaks to idiots." "But I need this job," Adele said, tears stinging her eyes. "You don't understand. I have debts." "Not anymore," James said. He turned to Henderson. "I'm buying the building. As of this second, I own the gilded cage." Henderson's jaw dropped. "Sir?" "And my first act as owner," James said, turning back to Adele, "is to promote you." "To what?" Adele asked, breathless. James leaned in, his blue eyes piercing her soul. "My personal taster. And my consultant." "I don't want to be part of your world, Mr. Moretti," Adele said, finding a backbone she didn't know she had. "I know who you are. I know what you do." James smiled then. It was a real smile, dangerous and charming. "You just saved the capo of the Chicago outfit, using high school chemistry and a salad fork, Adele. You're already part of my world." He turned to walk away, then stopped. "Be outside in 5 minutes. Silas will drive you home. Pack a bag." "Pack a bag?" Adele called out. "You're a target now, Adele," James said over his shoulder. "Isabella's family will want to know who ruined their coup. You're coming with me." And with that, he walked out into the rain. Adele stood in the center of the silent restaurant, the black fork still lying on the table like a cursed artifact. The ride to James's estate was a blur of rain-streaked windows and suffocating silence. Adele sat as far away from James as the leather interior of the armored SUV would allow, clutching her bruised hand. "You're kidnapping me," Adele said, her voice small but firm. She stared at the back of Silas's head in the driver's seat. James didn't look up from his phone. The blue light illuminated the sharp angles of his face, making him look more statue than man. "I'm securing an asset. There's a difference. I have a life. I have a cat. I have rent due on Tuesday. Your rent is paid for the next century," James said flatly, "and I'll have someone pick up the cat." "What's its name?" "Mr. Whiskers," Adele muttered, then immediately felt ridiculous. "Look, Mr. Moretti, I appreciate the job offer, really, but I can't be involved in a mafia war. I'm just a waitress who paid attention in chemistry class." James finally turned to her. The intensity of his gaze made the air in the car feel thin. "You think Isabella Thorne is going to let you live?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of pity. "You humiliated her. You exposed her as an incompetent assassin in front of her fiancé and her bodyguards. The DeLuca family, her family, operates on pride. Blood for blood. If I let you out of this car, you will be dead within the hour. A mugging gone wrong in an alley." Adele swallowed hard. She knew he was right. The DeLucas were legendary for their brutality. "So what? I just live with you now?" "For now," James said, "until I dismantle them." The car turned off the highway and began to climb a winding private road along the cliffside of Lake Michigan. At the top stood a structure of steel and glass that looked less like a house and more like a fortress. The Glass Fortress, the papers called it. As they pulled into the subterranean garage, a team of armed men swarmed the vehicle. Adele flinched. "Relax," James said, opening his door. "They work for me. Stay close." He led her into an elevator that shot up 50 floors in seconds. When the doors opened, Adele gasped. The penthouse was a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the storm-tossed lake and the glittering city skyline. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly terrifying. "Silas, show Miss Rinaldi to the East Wing guest suite," James commanded, taking off his wetsuit jacket, "and get the medical kit." "I can bandage myself," Adele said quickly. James stopped. He walked over to her, encroaching on her space, until she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He reached out and took her injured hand again. The bruise had darkened to an ugly purple. "You were hurt, protecting me," James said. His thumb brushed her knuckles, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm that had nothing to do with pain. "In my world, loyalty is the only currency that matters. You showed loyalty to a stranger. That makes you rare." He led her not to the guest room, but to the kitchen, a kitchen larger than her entire apartment. He sat her on a marble island stool. "Ice," he ordered Silas, who had appeared with a kit. For the next 10 minutes, the most feared man in Chicago played nurse. He wrapped her hand with professional efficiency. Adele watched him, mesmerized. He had killed men. She knew that, but his hands were steady and gentle. "Why didn't you marry her?" Adele asked softly. "Before tonight. You knew she was crazy." James taped the bandage. "It was a merger. Her father, Salvatore De Luca, controls the shipping docks. I control the unions and the real estate. Together we would have owned the Midwest. The marriage was a necessary evil." "And now?" James looked up, his eyes cold. "Now the merger is off, and Salvatore will take that as a declaration of war." He finished the bandage. "Go to sleep, Adele. Tomorrow, you earn your keep." Adele was led to a bedroom that cost more than her father's life earnings. She locked the door, pushed a heavy dresser in front of it, and curled up on the bed. She didn't sleep. She watched the rain hit the glass, wondering if she had just traded a quick death for a slow one. Adele woke up to the smell of espresso and the sound of shouting. She disentangled herself from the Egyptian cotton sheets, threw on the silk robe that had been left for her, and crept out into the hallway. The shouting was coming from the main atrium. She peeked over the railing. James was standing in the center of the room, shirtless, sweating, hitting a heavy bag. Thud, thud, crack. Each punch sounded like a gunshot. His back was a map of scars, knife wounds, bullet grazes, old battles. Silas was standing nearby, holding a tablet. "Boss, Salvatore is burning down our warehouses in the South Loop. He says it's retribution for kidnapping his daughter." James stopped the bag with one hand. "Kidnapping? I sent her home in a trunk. She's fine." "He's spinning the narrative," Silas said. "He's telling the other families you broke the truce. He's putting a bounty on you. And on the girl." James grabbed a towel and wiped his face. He looked up and saw Adele watching from the balcony. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked calculated. "Come down, Adele," he called out. Adele tightened her robe and walked down the floating staircase. "Good morning." "Is it?" James tossed the towel aside. "Come into the office. We have work to do." The office was a wall of monitors. On the screens were live feeds of the city, bank accounts, shipping routes. "You said you were a chemistry major," James said, sitting behind a massive ebony desk. "But you know antiques. You know etiquette. You know how to read a room. Why is a girl with your skill set waiting tables at the Gilded Cage?" Adele hesitated. "My father was bad with money." "Arthur Rinaldi," James said, pulling up a file on the screen. "Antique dealer, gambler, died 3 years ago of a heart attack. Left you with a debt of $250,000. Adele went cold. "How do you know that?" "I know everything," James said. "But here is the interesting part, Adele. Who held your father's debt?" "Some loan sharks. I pay them $2,000 a month just to keep the interest down." James tapped a key. A picture of a man appeared on the screen, a man with a thick neck and a cruel smile. "Luca Brasi," James said, "a lieutenant for the De Luca family. You've been paying Isabella's father for 3 years." Adele felt the room spin. "What?" "The De Lucas bled your father dry, drove him to his grave, and now they are bleeding you. You're a slave to the people who tried to poison me last night." Adele grabbed the edge of the desk. The anger that flared in her chest was hot and blinding. All those shifts, all those skipped meals, all the humiliation. It was all going to the same monsters. "I want them dead," Adele whispered. It wasn't a waitress speaking anymore. James leaned forward. "Good, because I bought your debt this morning." Adele blinked. You paid it?" "Every cent. You don't owe them anything anymore. You owe me." James stood up and walked around the desk. "But I don't want your money, Adele. I want your eyes." "My eyes?" "You saw the tarnish on the fork when I didn't," James said intently. "You noticed Isabella's nervousness when my trained guards didn't. You have an eye for detail that my men lack. They see guns and muscles. You see chemistry and psychology." He pointed to a stack of files on the table. "The De Lucas are smuggling something through my city. They are using the merger talks as a cover to move a shipment that is worth billions. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how they are moving it. If I can find it and expose it, I can destroy Salvatore without firing a shot. I want you to go through their documents, find the anomaly, find the tarnished fork in their shipping manifest." Adele looked at the files. It was a mountain of paperwork. Invoices, bills of lading, chemical reports. "And if I find it," Adele asked, "then your debt to me is wiped clean, and I give you $1 million to start a new life anywhere in the world." Adele looked at the files, then at James. "Deal." She sat down and began to read. For the next 72 hours, the penthouse at the top of the glass fortress became a cage of gold and silence. Outside, Chicago was being battered by a relentless storm that turned the skyline into a gray smear. Inside, Adele Rinaldi was dissecting the criminal empire of the De Luca family, one sheet of paper at a time. She had turned the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of the office into a chaotic mind map. Using dry erase markers, she had drawn timelines, connected shipping routes, and circled chemical formulas that didn't add up. She lived on espresso and the adrenaline of survival, her hair tied back in a messy knot, wearing one of James's crisp white dress shirts that swallowed her small frame. James Moretti watched her. He spent most of the time pacing the perimeter of the room like a caged tiger, fielding calls from his captains, ordering counterstrikes on DeLuca territories. But his eyes always drifted back to Adele. He was used to women who wanted his money, his power, or his body. He wasn't used to a woman who ignored him completely to calculate the specific gravity of liquid imports. It was 3 a.m. on the third night when the breakthrough happened. The penthouse was dim, lit only by the lightning flashing over Lake Michigan. Adele was staring at a manifest from a month ago, chewing on the end of a marker. "It's a lie," she whispered. James, who was cleaning a custom Sig Sauer P320 on the leather sofa, looked up instantly. "What is?" "The olive oil," Adele said, her voice gaining strength. She tapped the glass wall hard. "Come look at this." James holstered the weapon and walked over, standing close behind her. The heat radiating from him was distracting, but Adele forced herself to focus on the numbers. The DeLucas claim this container, shipment ID 8944, is full of extra virgin olive oil from Naples, Adele explained, circling the weight declaration. "But look at the thermal logs required by maritime insurance. The container was kept at exactly 4 degrees Celsius for the entire 3-week journey." "Maybe they like their oil cold," James said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "No," Adele turned to face him, her eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt. "Olive oil solidifies and becomes cloudy at that temperature. It ruins the texture. No distributor would ship it that cold. But 4 degrees Celsius, that is the universal preservation standard for biological organic material, organs, blood plasma, stem cells." James's expression darkened, the playful curiosity vanishing instantly. "Biologicals?" "I cross-referenced the receiver address," Adele continued, grabbing a stack of printed papers. "Asclepius Logistics. It sounds like a medical supplier, but look at their tax filing. It's a shell company registered in the Caymans, with no medical license. They aren't importing oil, James. They're smuggling human tissue. It's a black market organ farm." James took the papers from her hand, his jaw tightening. Salvatore De Luca is old school. Gambling, loans, unions. But this is harvesting. If he's moving unlicensed biologicals through commission territory, he's not just breaking the law, he's breaking the code. The other families would execute him for bringing this kind of federal heat down on the organization. "There is something else," Adele said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She felt sick saying it. "I found the reason why Isabella chose the gilded cage for dinner." She held up the final document. It was a customs clearance form, stamped and signed. "The signature," Adele pointed. "It's not a customs officer. It's a proxy signature, allowed for trusted local liaisons." James looked at the scrawled name. M. Henderson. The silence in the room was deafening. "Henderson," James breathed, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. "My restaurant manager, the man who poured my wine for 10 years. He wasn't just managing the floor, Adele realized, the horror dawning on her. The restaurant is 3 blocks from the Port Authority. It was a drop site. Henderson has been signing off on the DeLuca shipments, burying the thermal logs so no one asked questions. He's their gatekeeper. "And that," James said, his eyes turning to ice, "is why Isabella tried to kill me at dinner. She wasn't just being dramatic. She was there to pick up the manifests from Henderson. I was just loose ends to be tied up." James grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over Silas's number. "I'm going to skin him alive." Ding! The sound didn't come from his phone. It came from the private elevator in the foyer, the one that required a retinal scan and a 6-digit code to access. James froze. He looked at the elevator indicator. The numbers were climbing. 48, 49, 50. "Adele," James said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Get behind the desk." "Who is it?" Adele asked, backing away. "Silas?" "Silas would have radioed," James said, racking the slide of his gun. "Henderson didn't just sign papers. I gave him emergency access codes to the building when I bought the deed 3 days ago. He just let them in." The elevator doors didn't open. They exploded. A shaped C4 charge blew the steel doors off their hinges, sending a shockwave of heat and shrapnel tearing through the penthouse. The blast threw James backward over the sofa. Adele screamed as the floor-to-ceiling windows shattered, raining millions of diamonds of safety glass onto the